as I started to learn about you, I first learned about you on Katie Halper. I didn't know who you were before that. And my partner is really, really into, he's the one who turned me on to all these channels. And I started listening to you speak, and I'm like, who is this guy? Then I started looking you up, and then I found the Brene Brown response and
Mm.
learned you were Daniel, Gabor Mate's son. And so the first thing I wanted to ask you, I grew up with a father who was a rabble rouser, an activist in the 60s, and always having deep, deep, deep conversations around the table. And as I have discovered you and your brother and know of your father, like all of you seem to have this amazing conscientiousness about humanity that you all came into adults with. Like, you know, we seem to irradiate this sense of understanding humanity. And so my first question was, what was it like growing up being Daniel Mate?
Well, it was complicated. um, I think every childhood can be complicated. uh, and being from the family I'm from had its own unique complications. Um, but in terms of the dimension that you're pointing to, um, my father was a very impressive presence when he was present. He's the first to admit that there were ways in which he could be quite absent, both physically and emotionally.
Mhm.
But I mean, I to say I looked up to him would be an understatement. I kind of worshipped him. Um, his, it wasn't just him, but his brother was a political activist, organizing peace marches in Vancouver, an event called Give Peace a Dance every year against nuclear disarmament. This is in the 1980s, there's so the Reagan era. And yeah, my uncle used to go out in a little boat into the Vancouver harbor, uh, and with a bullhorn, this tiny little boat, little fishing boat, loudly command U.S. naval ships to leave our waters, and he'd get sprayed with a high pressure hose sometimes. I mean, so the whole, and my other uncle was a strong personality as well, who wasn't afraid to speak up for what was right. So my whole family, I sort of associated being Jewish with having an outsider perspective, and um, I identifying with and advocating for the least of these, and essentially I grew up with an anti-imperialist perspective, not just a left-wing domestic liberal perspective, but a radical uh, uh, opposition that was kind of just baked in to the United States as one of the world's evil empires, and
Mhm.
the leading one. I remember my father would uh, fly down to Nicaragua to do solidarity work there, in the age of the Sandinistas and the Contras, and educated me about that. So it was thrilling, actually, because he was so able to cut through mainstream propaganda. It was also highly inconvenient because then I go to school and I have to be the one to like dissent from what my teachers are saying, and I'm kind of talking out of my ass because I'm 11 years old, but I'm saying what I know. And and now I'm a peacenik and getting made fun of by my friends who are all into GI Joe and the video game called Contra, where you're actually part of a Western fighting force killing terrorists or whatever.
Right.
And then there was the extra complication that this anti-Zionist father of mine, who had been an idealistic little Zionist in his teens, but did some reading and cured himself of that and became quite the opposite. Although he doesn't call himself an anti-Zionist, but I think functionally he is. But he also sent me to a Zionist summer camp, which
I
is
was
the
going to ask
same
about
Zionist
that.
summer camp that the whole family had gone to. Both my uncles met their wives there. My cousin met her husband there. So also inconvenient to come to that place where there's Israeli counselors fresh out of the army telling us stories about Israel's gloried history and the kibbutz, and um, the furthest left you could be there was a kind of Israel's gone too far and the occupation is bad, but the word Nakba was never used, right? But here I am, and I know better because my dad's exposed me to things, and I've read Noam Chomsky by age 13. And
Okay.
kind of a freak, you know. Um,
Yeah, little baby.
yeah, you know, not great for the social life,
Hmm.
but it gave me a sense of there are things more important than popularity, or at least so I told myself. I don't know if I really felt that way.
Right.
I probably would have taken some positive female attention over being on the right side of history at that age. Um, so you know, it was a mixed bag, and then mixed into that was all the emotional and psychological dynamics of the family. Um, my father's activism was often motivated by a kind of rage, a kind of anger, which on the one hand was very impressive to me, and on the other hand reminded me of the emotional climate that had pretty much terrorized me in my early years in the home. So I was both in awe of him and afraid of him at the same time, and those two things kind of got coupled together, which creates an interesting sort of dynamic. So there's a lot, but overall, it was a rare and precious thing, I think, to grow up in a family where you get a counter hegemonic narrative, um, and you can already go into the world with your eyes open and with
Right.
some tools of what Chomsky calls intellectual self-defense.
Okay. I was gonna say emotional, intelligence as well, because you admit that even though there's all these complications, you admit sort of a sense of self and a sense of how you're navigating your emotional space as well, less reactionary and more, more responsive.
Well,
Uh,
that's something I've had to work at. Uh, any emotional intelligence I've had. I mean, I grew up thinking I was emotionally intelligent, but a few years ago, after a particularly disastrous relationship fell apart, I realized, no, I'm not emotionally intelligent. I'm intelligent about emotions, and
yeah.
and there's a difference.
You said your father had anger that backed his activism that kind of fueled it. Did you find anger fueled your activism as well?
Well, I've never really been an activist. I mean, honestly, I've never been an activist. I've been a mouthpiece. I've been a bullhorn sometimes in certain environments. And ever since October 7th, I've been doing what may seem to some as activism, and I suppose it is. I'm doing counter propaganda and helping people in that way.
Fair.
But as far as the anger goes, um, yes, I remember some explosions at summer camp, but I've always been afraid of my anger because my dad's anger was so toxic
Right.
Mm.
when I was a kid, and my own anger was so what can I say, criminalized. I mean, you know, I or at least I had to suppress. You know, I had to find other ways that
You're
could.
angry. You're angry. The scolding voice that comes with, yes, I am angry.
Well, exactly right, right. But instead of being angry, I had to be right. I had to be convincing. I had to be persuasive. I had to be reasonable. All these other working way too hard rather than just saying that makes me angry. So that was one of the features of my childhood wounding, I guess you could say. Um, so when my anger would erupt, it would usually be followed by a torrent of tears. It
Hmm.
was a kind of despair. I'm all alone. Why don't people?
I see.
I'm all alone with this conscience. Why can't people see it? So it's a more sensitive kind of uh, outrage that's mixed with loneliness rather than just moral indignation, which is more my father's style. Um, and either way, uh, it can fuel good activism, and it can get in the way,
Yeah.
depending on your relationship to it.
Yeah. I wrote a poem about when activists go after activists. It's called Kill the Dove.
Hmm.
You're writing co-authoring books with him, so there's been healing along the way, I would assume.
Yeah, and it's hard to say what's the chicken and what's the egg. We certainly had to do some healing before we could write together. So in the way the writing together is a testament to that, and the other way the writing together is a strong driver of it too, because um, in order to be able to write together, we got to get our shit together, and we got to get into the present, which is what healing is. And I have to learn to see myself in a new way and relate to him in a new way, and give up old reactions based on certain stories. Absolutely. He has to learn to see me as a separate person. And, collaboration is a kind of scaffolding for setting boundaries. Because as his son, it was always hard for me to say no to him. Just a straight no. As his collaborator, it's just as plain as that. Sorry, I'm not going to work under these conditions. And you need me, so make your choice. So I suddenly, for the first time in my life, had leverage.
You're an adult now, though. You're an adult now.
It's crude to say, but it kind of worked that way. That because we were in a relationship where there was something at stake bigger than either of our feelings or opinions or positions, it induced us, I think, to find new ways of relating to each other. And of course, the biggest, the meta aspect of that is that our next book, which I assume will be our last book together, is about parent-adult-child relationships.
Awesome.
So the process becomes the content, and not just about us, but about everybody.
My parents were very unique people as well. And at 40, my dad got sober, decided to go study God, got his theology degree, and then told the church he wanted nothing to do with them. And became an independent counselor, did that. He worked in a hospital, and then he realized that they were not really there to heal people, that they were just pumping them in and out. And then he went into private practice. But I remember one of the things my mom said to me as a teenager, there's been stories that have been formed as children. And we really want you to know those are not the stories of who you are. And now as an adult woman, I look back at her saying that to me and just realizing the work they were trying to put into healing, and just how lucky I was, even if we had some dysfunction going on.
What a gift.
So you're a musician, an accomplished musician. Have you watched Macklemore's song?
I have.
Oh my God. I've listened to it like 4 times.
Best thing he's ever done. I'm a big rap fan. His style of rap is not generally my thing.
Same here.
And could quibble with some aspects of the craft of that song, but it's perfect. But I can't, because it's just it's a taste thing. But who gives a fuck? Like it's necessary.
Right.
It's heartfelt. It's full of facts. It's got great punchlines. It's got just a great point of view, and very uncompromising. I mean, just no punches pulled at all, and urgently needed from someone that big, So
I'm curious how many will follow now. I mean, the 60s were all about the music, right?
The 60s were all about the music. In what sense?
In the protest music, yeah.
It's true. It's funny. People always say that, and it's true. I mean, you had active protest movements going on, and you had songs like War, What Is It Good For? And you had Neil Young, Ohio, about Kent State, and you had songs that were topical. But when it comes to political commentary, I'm going to stand by my 80s chauvinism and say that I grew up in the best era for topical songs on the radio as pop music.
Okay, name one.
Prince, Sign of the Times. Genesis, Land of Confusion, with that video of the British puppets, the spitting image puppets of Reagan and Thatcher and Gorbachev. Sting had a song called The Russians. The Russians love their children too. Songs about nuclear holocaust. Tracy Chapman, Fast Car, which is a song about social class.
Right.
On and on and on. Heavy metal was taking on politics. Metallica was singing songs about nuclear annihilation and not cheering it on at all. Punk and ska, Fishbone had a song about nuclear annihilation. Party at Ground Zero, Living Color, Cult of Personality. I mean, and then hip hop.
Right.
The message, broken glass everywhere, people pissing on the streets, they just don't care. It was a great time for a kind of music that was really responding to the times in an urgent way, but in a sense, that was in the absence of any strong protest movement. I mean, the 80s was a time of conformity. I mean, I guess the nuclear disarmament thing was a big deal, but you know, the U.S. security state and the imperialist state had won by that point, and Reagan was the victory lap for the conservatives. So, you know, either way, but I'm so grateful that I came of age in the 80s. I just think it's the best.
Well, thank you for redeeming my coming of age, because I always say we had nothing but greed is good, and but you are 100% right. You know, back then I remember fighting against. They were trying to make laws that if you were popped for selling drugs, they could seize all your property, and I remember thinking we can win this one. So here we are. One of the things that really touched me on Take a Walk with Daniel, I've had a very, very close relationship pull away, and a couple others that just, you know, we're not seeing the things the same. But one is a very close relationship that this person I love deeply, and they resigned working with me, and I've had some discussions with some of my friends, but the one that really affected me is how does it feel to keep defending Israel? And I'm imagining that was coming out of the same experiences that I've been having, but it changed me. It made me feel less alone, you know, less like I'm fighting. Is that part of your motive for what you're doing?
Yeah, I think so. I had an inkling on October 8th that I could put things in a light that would make people feel less insane. And I thought that was important, that people should know that they're not seeing things, you know, and to fortify them for what was coming, because I just sensed that something horrible was around the pike.
Yeah.
I did not expect it to have the reach or the impact that it's had on people. Didn't quite realize how necessary it would be and how much demand. I thought I was going to do one video and be done with it, you know. But it's turned out to be something that at this point I'm not even, I mean, I haven't been posting nearly as much recently. I'm just not feeling like it. Like I just don't know what to say anymore.
Right.
But even if I didn't post another thing, I've put a lot out there that has been of use to people, so they tell me. So that's yeah, that feels good.
So, you know, I was learning meditation a few years ago, and getting into more self-care. And Oprah with Deepak Chopra did this one on hope. And after watching all 12, I realized screw hope, screw fear. You know, it's easy for you to talk about sitting on your beach being grateful while I'm struggling to pay the mortgage, you know, and doing journalism. And so there's
You're just not, you're just not
privileged white
manifesting.
people therapy.
You're just not manifesting hard enough, Shavonne.
That's right.
I'm just treating her like a human being with a huge platform who's made it.
What do you want to speak on with that? I mean, your response to her was incredible. I mean, you were responding to privileged American siding with Israel without understanding the whole scope of the reality.
Yeah, my
Huh?
objection was more that she was siding with Israel without admitting that she was siding with Israel.
Right.
It was the disingenuity of it. And she didn't even know that she was doing that, I don't think. But her, I think, material interests and her sort of institutional, her social position interests induced her to that position. And I just thought it needed to be called out. I've never been particularly drawn to her work, but I know that it's had a positive impact for a lot of people, especially women in the corporate world, I think.
Right.
Which at best is a way of coping with a toxic situation, but not worthless. But you know, if you're going to be silent for a long time and then speak up with that kind of platform, I think you've got to be open to some pushback. And I just felt the need to provide it. I'm very surprised by how widely seen that video has been. I recorded it quite off the cuff. But yeah, just anytime I see videos or statements like that, there's so many unquestioned hidden assumptions that, while cloaked in language that sounds touchy-feely and universal, and I see God in the eyes of every children, if you actually drill down into what they're saying and what they're not saying, it's pretty nasty, and it's pretty bigoted, and it's pretty blinkered at best. And I think that's bad for people. It's like, I don't know, you buy a health food product that says organic, and it turns out that, like, maybe the wheat is organic, but the MSG isn't. Like, it's a poison pill in a sense. That kind of nice even-handedness, that kind of peace talk. Peter Tosh said, "Don't talk to me about peace. I don't want no peace. I want equal rights and justice." And I just felt, and I knew, I could see from people's reactions that they were kind of stymied by it. Like, is this good? Is this bad? Something about this feels off. And when something feels off, but people can't put their finger on it, that's usually a moment where I can step in and be like, I think I can speak to why this feels off, and you're not wrong.
Yeah, it took me a minute as I started to become aware that it wasn't that I wasn't trying hard enough. It wasn't that I wasn't working hard enough. It's the mental health of our society is because of, in part, our society. It's not that we don't have a mental health crisis. We have a societal crisis.
That's the entire thesis of The Myth of Normal, the first book I wrote with my dad, of course.
So, we're publishing a story today. We have a young Palestinian that's working with us, and we are publishing a story today on Canary Mission. And I've checked, I'm not on the list yet. I haven't, neither Yellow Sea nor myself is. I don't know if I'll end up there, but what kind of backlash have you received? And are you still welcome in Jewish spaces?
Well, I wasn't frequenting Jewish spaces to begin with, so I don't know.
Okay.
I recently went to a Jewish Passover celebration out in the wilderness in California, and I was very welcomed. I mean, most of the people there were of the same political mindset that I am, as a lot of younger people, I mean, younger than me, are these days. I'm sure that my entire family is resented in some circles. I know that. I mean, you don't want to base your impressions on YouTube comments, because it's a alternate universe,
Right.
But no, I'm sure that some places I went, I would be looked at funny, especially if I wore my keffiyeh and my End the Genocide hat. I have found people come into my comment sections, or my DMs, sometimes with vitriol and just bluster. They love to use the word capo, which is a word for Jewish collaborators in the concentration camps, Jews who, in order to survive, took positions of, snitching on their fellow Jews, or having privileged positions in the concentration camps to save their own skins. Which, to me, that's just not even an accusation worth making. I don't victim blame people who survive by whatever means, whatever I think. So to me, it's just not it's a testament to the actual contempt that Zionists have for victims, and for and the self-loathing they have about being descended from Holocaust victims.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have come to me with a kind of respect, or at least bewildered, like a kind of bewildered, why are you taking this position? And when I respond with respect, some people have changed their minds, some people have not. I haven't found it to be terrible. I certainly, like, anytime anyone's commended me for bravery, I have to balk at that, because bravery indicates that I had something to lose. I had no community to lose, because I wasn't affiliated with the mainstream Jewish world. I may pay that price down the line, but there's more and more Jewish spaces where people like me are welcome. I had no job to lose, because I work independently, and the book had already been published, and my dad and my positions on Gaza haven't hurt sales at all over the world. I'm not affiliated with any university, so I don't have tenure or some kind of institutional clout or position to lose. All I had to lose was time and energy, and those things are worth losing sometimes, because you gain something else, including a sense of that you used your time well. So I don't know. I'm in no way any kind of victim of this situation. There are people, including Jewish people, who have really put things on the line. I've been in a position where I don't have to.
That's nice that you recognize that. And Yellow Scene was first new. I was 1 year old, and we were just a little flyer. And I sold an ad. I paid for the printing. I borrowed no money the first decade. And 9/11 happened, and I knew I had to make a decision what kind of media outlet we were going to be. And so we had a column called The Wrecking Ball that was very critical of George Bush, and I came out extremely critical of the Iraq War. I got hate mail, hate phone calls. I'm surprised we haven't gotten a lot of negative backlash as Yellow Scene, because we have published things. We've taken a stance. I put ceasefire up on our Instagram on October 17th or something. So, but I've throughout history, and it's right. It's right. And so, one of the things I wanted to ask you about that's a little bit more complicated, and I don't know if either one of us have the ability to answer this, but we know what's going on right now can't last forever. A lot of people are bantering around a two-state solution. I'm a big believer in equal rights for all. I think a ethno religious state is going to automatically be based in racism. But do you have any predictions or any thoughts on what is your vision for how a solution would work?
I don't prognosticate. I have no idea. I'm not a political analyst. And my vision is kind of worth the paper it's written on, and it's not written, so it's not really worth much. Obviously, I like the idea of a non-sectarian, non-ethno state, democratic state for all, in fact, and a dismantlement of Zionism. But that's nice, it's a nice vision, and I'm glad people are working towards that. One of the things I'm coming to grips with is whatever the solution is, it's going to have to be created by the people on the ground. Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, the people in the land who live there. And this conflict has become such a flashpoint for world opinion and attention that we can sometimes think that we are making a difference by doing activism, yelling slogans, and prescribing this solution or that solution. Nothing wrong with slogans, and nothing wrong with a vision of freedom and justice. And as long as there's an occupation, resistance, I think, is mandatory. But from when I start to speak to actual Israelis and Palestinians who live there or who have strong connections there, you find out that they're not so into this solution or that solution as they are, how can we work together to de-escalate the hate? There are Palestinians on the land who, if you said to them, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they would not know what you're talking about. They're like, we just want to live, and they have to live there. I did an interview which hasn't come out yet, but it'll be on someone else's podcast, with Alon Lee Green, who's the head of Standing Together,
Okay.
who have taken some flack from the Palestine Solidarity Movement. BDS called them out for being,
I saw that.
normalizers,
Mhm.
because they don't explicitly call for an end to Zionism. And they do talk about freeing the hostages and all that, while they unequivocally call for an end to the apartheid system and the occupation and freeing Palestinian prisoners and all that. And I said, well, what do you make of all that? Do they have a point? And he said, look, you people out there in the bleachers and the cheap seats can say all you want. We're the ones here who are going to have to live with the consequences. So I'm kind of out of the game of It's fine to theoretically debate what would be the most just solution,
Right.
but we don't get to have that world. We can fight for it, we can work towards it, it's fine. But in my heart, what I would like to see, whatever happens, in my mind, anything short of a dismantlement, a complete and total defeat of the ethos of supremacist Zionism
Hmm.
is mandatory, because it's a cancer.
Hmm.
If that's there, then it will not rest until, as long as, it thrives on division there. Now, Zionists would say that, Islamic fundamentalism is also a cancer. It might be, but I see Zionism as the far greater threat, because it's imperialist,
Hmm.
and it's not tied to a resistance movement reacting to Western imperialism. Islamic fundamentalism thrives under conditions of occupation and oppression. There was no Hamas in the West Bank. There still isn't. But Zionists don't really care about that. They'll imprison the moderate ones. That's the real threat. It's also just disingenuous, So even though groups that are Islamic fundamentalist have committed acts of terror and atrocities, so have moderate, more, or at least secular groups. The PLO is a secular group. So it's all in the context of a political resistance, which occupied peoples have the right to, whether you agree with their tactics or not.
Right. Right.
Um, the Whereas Zionism is a power structure
Hmm.
with a massive collection of weapons and institutions, so, and it also has the Israeli mind captive, and the Israeli heart, like it's just poison. Whereas if you ask most Palestinians, it's not that they don't buy into the Hamas logic. They'll go with whoever the resistance is,
Hmm.
or they oppose it. But Israelis are completely and totally captured by the dogma, except for the noble ones who are standing up and waking up. So all of that to say, I just don't know.
Yeah. IDF TikTok, one of the things that's horrible. I understood from Citizens United how much control outside forces have over our Congress, but watching this, I I don't think my mind could grasp how much APAC controls our Congress and our president. And one of the things I said on Jeff Bard's show was that Friday Netanyahu did that speech, and America needs to fix its universities. These students are out of control. They're Nazis. They're Hamas. They need to stop them. And then Monday, there's Biden calling them violent when they are absolutely not. And we're sending in the army of police. And
Yeah.
it is just mind boggling to me how bad that is. And it's just going to piss these students off. And this is what I said on Jeff Farr. You're going to, not only are you pissing them off by sending them and beating them up, but you're lying about them.
You're lying about them to their parents, to their teachers, to their future employers. You're going to lose them, and it's going to lose if there's any justice, it'll lose the Democrats the election. I'm not praying for their opponent, but they deserve to be obliterated, based on their performance here. Of course, the Republicans are no better. Mike Johnson's been absolutely disgusting. So much for America first, as Max Blumenthal said on a recent Gray Zone stream. It's a complete and total coup, political coup by a foreign country of the US political system. And whether you want to argue like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, who wrote the book about the Israel lobby, that the lobby is the primary influence, or whether you want to go with Chomsky and Finkelstein and say, no, it's just more about US geopolitical interests and expediency, or some combination of both, which strikes me as the most likely. Either way, they got him. They just it's a total capture, and it's disgusting. And some rare people in Congress have somewhat redeemed themselves or been strong on this from the start, but way too few and far between. And even the best ones, except for Talib and Omar, are who actually have skin in the game, are susceptible to all kinds of fallacies and just buying into the basic premises. And if once you play that game, you lose.
The Black Lives Matter movement made progress. I mean, we haven't ended racism, and police are still beating people up, but there has been a shift and change. And right now we have a lawsuit against the city of Boulder's police department because they tried to charge us $3,000 for a Cora for a police shooting. And there are small bills that happen incrementally forward, but American imperialism is causing great harm to its people. Is there any hope for Jill Stein?
I mean, not if the system has anything to do about it, and it does. The hope of a Jill Stein or a Cornel West is not that they're going to win. I mean, Bernie was both an aberration and a kind of exception that proved the rule, because even he couldn't stick to his principles and had to cave and endorse Biden while getting bubkiss in return. Jill Stein is marginal. She can pull some votes, and again, the point of a third party is not to carry the hopes for victory, but to put a thorn in the side of those in power and try to let them know you could lose. You could lose your people. And I think it was Lawrence O'Donnell, the MSNBC guy who used to be a political flack for the Democrats, said one thing he learned in his political career: you got to make them scared that you won't vote for them. Otherwise, they won't do shit. They don't have to.
Right.
Yeah, we've rarely ever actually seen the emergence of a third party. I mean, it only happens when the internal power structure of one party collapses and there's a vacuum to fill. While there's two parties filling that vacuum, that like you're saying, the third party really can only draw attention to issues rather than outright replace one of those through the electoral process.
No, I mean, there's been moments where democracy threatened to break out in America.
I like that.
Ralph Nader and
Right.
And you could say Bernie Sanders was a kind of insurgency from a new conception of what the Democrats could be. But the system, the empire, always strikes back. It's built for that. It has these built-in contingency systems. And if the politicians can't convince the people, which they can't, they're completely unpersuasive, then you've got the media, and that's the main arm of enforcement of the status quo, bounding the terms of debate, as Chomsky outlined in his propaganda model. It's airtight, all under the guise of a free democratic society. So look at us, we have a free exchange of opinions, unless you're, doing anti-Israel rhetoric or whatever,
Progressive on everything but Palestine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There was a couple of things you were saying, and I have kind of a slogan I made up. I'd totally be a socialist, except for the capitalists have the guns and the money. And one of the things, I hear people saying they want to leave the country, and I'm like, well, I hope you have the money too. For me, I guess part of why, I have stayed with true journalism. We stayed independent. We happen to be the largest platform in our backyard because I've invested in it, and I don't give up. But, I don't know if you've ever heard of Rest for Revolution and, mental health for activists and mental health for people who are trying to shift it. But part of me why I don't give up is this is my country too. And I don't know what kind of changes we can make. I have to believe that we can. I know I know Chomsky wrote about it. Progress moves very, very, very slowly. And the lesser of two evils is still less evil. But this year, I don't know if I can vote for the less evil.
Yeah, and I don't know that you can actually make a categorical determination of which one is less evil, quite frankly. The blue no matter who logic of orange man bad always struck me as disingenuous. You got as many war criminals, if not more, in the Democratic camp these days. Trump's the only president in recent memory who hasn't started a new war. He did kill Soleimani in is it Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, somewhere. But I mean, he's a loathsome amphibian, you know, morally empty and or worse. But yeah, I mean, I'm regularly more disgusted by the Democrats than I am by the Republicans.
We're supposed to be better.
If only because of the pretense, you know, and the sanctimony and the condescension. Well, who else are you going to vote for? What are you going to do? And then claiming to stand with Black lives and you know, brown people and oppressed people. It's absurd. But yeah, I do think we have to act as if, and I think, like, people talk about what gives me hope. I don't believe in hope. I believe in possibility, and possibility is right now. It's not contingent on a better future. And what I would say, like listening to what you're saying, you're doing that out of self-interest. It's not altruism. Why? Because you want to live a life worth living. And for you, it would have no integrity. The experience of being alive, if you weren't acting as if something else was possible now, would be a very impoverished one. And that's because your integrity matters to you. So you want to live a life where you get to experience yourself as doing something worthwhile. So that's what you're doing. It's great.
My dad, at the end of his life, I would go down. They stayed here. I took care of them. No, I was very happy that he never had to go check in anywhere. But at the end, I would come downstairs. How's it going today, Dad? He's like, you know, all you can do is look back and say, did I live a life of value, dignity, and respect? And so, you know, one of the things is we, as a tendency, value human life on net worth in this culture. And I know that I am not my bank account. It took me a minute to realize that, but I am not my bank account. And so I guess, you know, I want to know, can I look back and say, did I live a life of value, dignity, and respect? And sometimes no, but sometimes yes. So
yeah, in the aggregate.
So what do you see as ahead for you?
What's next is finishing this book with my dad. We're on deadline and got to get it done. And I probably have another book to write myself on mental chiropractic, my Walk with Daniel service, you know, which is a whole modality that I've developed and I'd like to share with people. I've got a huge amount of creative backlog. Like I'm a musical theater writer. You call me a musician. Really what I am is a songwriter, composer, and lyricist for musical theater. And I've got shows that are sitting on the shelf that need to find a home to develop themselves and be produced. It hurts my heart that I'm not working on them right now, or that I don't have the opportunity to develop them. I feel an obligation to them. I mean, they are the closest thing to children that I have. I've worked on them for some of them over a decade.
Okay.
So, and then there's probably new shows to write. I miss that part of my life. I'm a bit nervous about going back to it. The theater world can be very institutionally timid, and a lot of Zionists there too, who might be disinclined to do business with me. I don't know. We'll find out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
you. Bye.
Take care.